Hello and welcome to today's second half of the Sunday edition of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Today is Sunday, May 24th, 2026. I'm Aaron Siegel. Let's start with the comic section. In Overboard by Chip Dunham, we're outside on the island and we see Nate, and he's got his big sword in his hand, and he's grabbed a guy, a scientist of some kind that's collecting butterflies in a butterfly net, and he's grabbed the butterfly net, and we see that Nate says to the butterfly collector, "I'm using my size to bully you?" And the butterfly collector says, "Yeah." And Nate says, "So bullying someone smaller than you is mean?" And the guy releases all of his butterflies from his little container, and he says, "Okay, point taken, Nate." And that's Overboard by Chip Dunham. In Rhymes with Orange by Hilary B. Price, we see that it's daytime and there's a cruise ship, and somebody on the cruise ship says, "You wanted to know what the passengers think of your buffets?" Apparently, there's a helicopter that's delivering food in a giant box that says Uber Eats to the cruise ship. And apparently there's also a motorboat that's coming up to the cruise line with 10 boxes of pizzas. That's Rhymes with Orange by Hilary B. Price. And Pearls Before Swine by Stefan Pastis. It's daytime and Pig and Rat are outside, and Rat's got a robot of some kind. Pig says, "What do you have there, Rat?" And Rat says, "My new invention, ROCO. It stands for Robot Congressman." Pig says, "What does it do?" Rat says, "Not much, which is the point. Since everyone in Congress votes however their party tells them to, I programmed ROCO to do the same." Pig says, "How do you mean?" Rat says, "Well, you just tell ROCO how his party voted and he does the rest. Here, watch." And Rat says, "Hey, ROCO, your party's voting yes on a bill. How will you vote?" ROCO says, "I will vote yes." Rat says, "Oh, no, ROCO, your party's now voting no. How will you vote?" ROCO says, "I will vote no." And Rat says, "See, since he does exactly what human congressmen do, we can just use robots from now on." And then we see that ROCO says, "Now hand me the bribes." And Rat kicks him and he says, "Campaign donations. We call them campaign donations." And he kicks him some more. Then he goes back and he talks to Pig and he says, "We're still working out a few kinks." That's Pearls Before Swine by Stefan Pastis. And Get Fuzzy by Darby Connolly. Bucky comes up to Satchel and says, "Is that cheese? Gimme." And Satchel's putting something in his mouth. He says, "Oh no, I'm in processed heaven." Bucky says, "Give me it or I'll put you in individually wrapped hell." Satchel says, "Thou cheeseless ruffian, do your worst. That which does not kill me only makes me stronger." So Bucky takes a remote controller and he whaps Satchel over the head with it. Whap! Satchel says, "Oof. Ow, 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 ow." And Satchel's holding on to the piece of cheese and he says, "Oh, why me? Why me? Why? Oh, right, the cheese." And then he's still hurting and he's scratching his head, and he hands the cheese over to Bucky after a bite's taken out of it, and he says, "Apparently Nietzsche never got hit with a universal remote. Here." And Bucky takes the cheese and he says, "You are wise beyond your looks." And that's Get Fuzzy by Darby Connolly. In Zits by Jerry Scott and Jim Borgman, Dad has walked up on Jeremy and his friends all playing Twister on the floor. And Dad says, "Hey, Twister." And he walks past the Twister game and he sees that Mom is right down on the floor watching the Twister game. And we see Pierce and we see Jeremy's girlfriend, and they're all playing Twister. And Dad says, "And Twister Cop." And Mom says, "I'm just here to break up any funny stuff." And that's It's by Jerry Scott and Jim Borgman. In One Big Happy by Rick Dottore, Ruthie's sitting on the ottoman and she's reading something, and Willie comes in and he goes, "Arf, arf, arf." Ruthie looks at Willie and Willie goes, "Arf, arf." Ruthie gets up from the ottoman, puts her book down, and now she's running in the hallway, and Willie goes, "Arf, arf, arf." And Willie runs up the stairs, "Arf," and Ruthie chases him. And then Ruthie's in the room, and she's looking around like, what was Willie's issue? Then Willie runs around the corner, and then Ruthie looks under the bed. Then she goes downstairs. Then she goes back to where she was seated in the ottoman, and Willie has replaced her and is laying down on the ottoman now, and Ruthie is not happy. That's One Big Happy by Rick Dottore. In Mutts by Patrick McDonald. It's daytime, and Mooch and Earl are outside, and Earl is resting his head against a tree in the shade. And we see Mooch with a concert music stand and a baton, and Mooch is conducting all of the birds that are chirping and tweeting, as though, and the bees as well, and the dogs in the background and the ducks, and we hear tweet, tweet, chirp, quack, 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 oof, bzz, bzz, bzz. That's Mutts by Patrick McDonald. In Baby Blues by Rick Kirkman and Jerry Scott. It's daytime, and Dad's opened the door, and he's talking to Mom as Zoe and Hammy are walking out the door, and he says to Mom, "You make the salad and we'll get the burgers." And Mom says, "Listen, if I were you, I'd write down everyone's order before you get there." Dad's getting in the car, and then Mom says to him, "That way you won't sit at the drive-thru menu board while the kids argue about what they want and then change their mind 16 times while 100 cars pile up behind you." Dad is driving away, and he says, "I don't think that'll happen." Mom says, "I got honk-shamed in doing a go-round last time." That's Baby Blues by Rick Kirkman and Jerry Scott. In Blondie by Dean Young and John Marshall, Blondie comes into the room and she sees Dagwood sitting in the easy chair, and Blondie says, "It's such a beautiful day, honey. Maybe Herb would be coaxed into a brisk walk around the block." Dagwood says, "It's worth a shot, I guess." So Dagwood goes next door and he says to Herb Woodley, "How does a brisk walk around the block sound to you?" And Herb says, "You lost me at brisk." Dagwood says, "How does a brisk walk around the block sound?" "What do you say, Benny?" Apparently he's gone to talk to Benny, and Benny says, "Nope, not today, Dagwood." Dagwood goes to another neighbor, and the neighbor says, "I don't think so, Dag. I was just about to catch some quality shut-eye." Dagwood goes back to his house, and he's sitting on the easy chair again, and Blondie comes in and she says, "Goodness, honey, that was one brisk walk." And Dagwood says, "Brisk enough." That's Blondie by Dean Young and John Marshall. In Pickles by Brian Crane, Earl and Opal are sitting on the sofa. Opal's reading a book, and Earl says, "Opal, would you bake me a chocolate cake?" Opal says, "No, you don't need a chocolate cake, Earl." Earl says, "If I told you that you're beautiful, would you bake me a chocolate cake?" Opal says, "Flattery will get you nowhere." Earl says, "You are beautiful, you know." Opal puts down the book. She says, I'll see what I can do. It's Pickles by Brian Crane. And Garfield by Jim Davis. John sitting in his easy chair, and Garfield is laying on his back. And John says, I love you, Garfield. You make me smile. You make me laugh. You provide the kind of companionship that only an animal can offer. But to me, you're more than just a pet. I consider you a friend. What do you consider me, Garfield? Garfield, who's been laying on his back this whole time, says, furniture. It's Garfield by Jim Davis. And Classic Peanuts by Charles Schulz. It's daytime, and the gang is at the ballpark, and Charlie Brown's on the pitcher's mound, and he winds up, and then he throws a pitch, and it gets hit, and it completely dishevels Charlie Brown until he's only in his underwear. And he's sitting on the pitcher's mound, and his socks are hanging on his ears. And Lucy comes up to him, and Lucy's got a piece of paper in her hands, and she says, hey, manager, I'm working on a special project. I'm trying to write an article about some of the funny things that happen at baseball games. As she's walking away, she says, if you can think of anything funny, let me know. And Charlie Brown is still sitting there with the socks on his ears, and he says, that'll come up with anything. And that's Classic Peanuts by Charles Schulz. In The Family Circus by Bill Keane, we see that Billy is making a comment. You're still just a lightweight, Jeffy. Billy puts Jeffy on the scale, and he says, you only weigh 34 pounds, including your teddy bear. And then Jeffy looks around, and he grabs an elephant stuffed teddy bear, and then he goes back and he weighs himself again. Good thinking. Family Circus. In Foxtrot by Bill Amend, Jason's in school. He's in the classroom, and he's looking at a piece of paper. He's raising his hand, and he says, Miss O'Malley, I think there might be typos on the math test. Miss O'Malley says, oh? Jason says, the first problem asks us to solve 1/3 plus 1/8. Miss O'Malley says, yes, and? Jason says, it was too easy. Miss O'Malley says, that's not a typo, Jason. Jason says, oh. And Jason says, what about this easy second problem? Miss O'Malley, the teacher, says, class, a reminder that pencils are for writing, not throwing. Apparently, there were a whole bunch of pencils that got thrown at Jason. Jason says, and ow, the super easy third, ow, problem. And that's Foxtrot by Bill Amend. And finally, in The Lockhorns by Bunny Host and John Reiner, Leroy and a friend are looking through Leroy's yearbook, and he says to his friend, these were the acne years for Loretta. In the next panel, Leroy and Loretta are getting dressed. Loretta's putting on her shoes, and Leroy's putting on his tie. Loretta says, you know what would go with that tie? Therapy. In the next panel, Leroy and Loretta are leaving the ball game. And Loretta says to Leroy, I saw the way you were eyeing Mrs. Met. Okay. And in the final panel today, Leroy and Loretta are eating dinner at home in the dining room. And Leroy looks at Loretta, and he looks at his food, and he says, this can't be chicken. It tastes like chicken. And that's The Lockhorns by Bunny Host and John Reiner. Moving to the living section, some advice from Dear Abby, written by Gene Phillips. Years of verbal abuse leave wife beaten down. Dear Abby, my husband and I have been married for 40 years and have 2 grown children. My husband is controlling. He wants things done his way and only his way, and will go on and on about it if something is done any other way. He tells me to make up my mind about stuff, but then he gets mad when I do and tells me all the reasons it was wrong. He's never hit me, but I feel mentally and verbally battered all the time. He's even hollered at me out in public, which was humiliating. On the other hand, he's a good guy too. He helps with the cooking, cleaning, and laundry, and that's something to brag about. I'm just tired of feeling bad about myself and being embarrassed when he complains in front of our granddaughters, because I don't want them to think that it's okay for a male to holler at you and correct you in front of other people. I can't see throwing 40 years out the window. I've asked him to go to a marriage counselor with me, but he refuses. When I tell him that my father never, ever hollered at my mom in front of us, he tells me that I was raised in a make-believe world. It's affecting my health. My blood pressure is high, and I'm on 2 medicines for it. Do you have any suggestions? Signed, Yelled At in Texas. Dear Yelled At, yes, I do. For the last 40 years, you've been gaslighted. People with high blood pressure are at increased risk for strokes and heart attacks. Helping with the cooking, cleaning, and laundry does not make up for the abuse you're receiving, because your husband's verbal abuse and practice of humiliating you in public is now affecting your health. Find the number of that marriage and family therapist you hope to see with him and go alone. If you do, it may give you the tools not only to improve your health, but also to deal with the dysfunction at your home. Dear Abby, I'm a woman in my 50s. At the end of elementary school, I participated in spreading some untrue and hurtful rumors about another girl and boy in my class. When the situation came to light, I ended up taking the fall for the rumor, and almost my entire class turned against me. Instead of apologizing to the girl and boy, which is what I should have done, I ignored the situation and tried to go forward. A few months later, our family moved, so I had no further contact with anyone from that school. I still feel regret and pain because of what I did, even though more than 40 years have passed. How do I put the situation right? I've considered finding these 2 people and giving them the apology I should have given them a long time ago. My fear is that because so much time has passed, they think I'm odd for still worrying about it. What are your thoughts on seeking forgiveness for mistakes from one's youth? Signed, Regretful in Nevada. They're regretful. So you took the fall? Everyone who repeated the falsehood should have taken it with you. Because this still bothers you 40 years later, by all means, reach out and apologize if you can track down the people you hurt. But do it without any expectation of forgiveness. Do it because it will clear your conscience. To order How to Write Letters for All Occasions, send your name and mailing address plus check or money order for $8 U.S. funds to Dear Abby, Letter Booklet, P.O. Box 446, Kings Mills, Ohio, 45034-0446. Shipping and handling are included in that $8 price. And that's Dear Abby, written by Abigail Van Buren, also known as Jean Phillips, and was founded by her mother, Pauline Phillips. You can write to Dear Abby by going to the website, www.dearabby.com. Or you can send a letter to U.S. postage to Dear Abby, P.O. Box 69440, Los Angeles, California, 90069. Today's first letter from Dear Abby: years of verbal abuse leave wife beaten down. Some more advice, this time from Miss Manners by Judith Martin, Nicholas Ivor Martin, and Jacobina Martin. And the bride was stunningly quiet, entitled. Dear Miss Manners, years ago, a close friend of mine was getting married. As I'm known as a good baker among my friends, she asked if I would bake her a carrot cake for her wedding. I demurred, explaining that I was not qualified to bake a wedding cake. She insisted, saying it would be a small wedding with perhaps 20 guests. Instead, the number of guests swelled to over 100. The ingredients became rather expensive, not to mention that baking, assembling, decorating, and transporting a carrot wedding cake was no small feat. In addition, another friend and I were asked to host the bridal shower, which we did at my home, sharing the expense. The bride requested a formal classic menu, including salmon mousse. The preparation and expense of hosting this party were more than I had planned for, but I was happy to do it. Lastly, the bride asked me to style her hair on her wedding day, which I also happily agreed to. Her hair looked lovely and the wedding cake received many compliments. On her wedding day, the bride presented me with a lovely and thoughtful gift in the $50 to $75 range as a thank you for my role in her wedding. I was surprised but pleased by her thoughtfulness and felt a bit like a cad because in light of my extensive role and considerable expenses, I had brought a beautiful card but no wedding gift. I'd considered the wedding cake, the shower, and styling her hair to be my gifts to her. I'd spent hundreds of dollars, and I thought that she would value what I had done to make her wedding a success. It's worth mentioning that the bride was in her 30s and the groom in his 50s, so they really did not need any material gifts anyway. After the honeymoon, my friend called and through a thinly veiled story about an unidentified gift, confirmed with me that I had not brought her anything. Her voice sounded cold and disappointed. I was stunned, but it seemed ungracious for me to itemize my considerable investments, so I simply clarified that no, I had not brought a wedding gift. After this, our friendship cooled. We spent time together only once or twice again. Miss Manners, this has bothered me ever since. Should I have brought the bride and groom a token gift for the sake of showing my support? Should I have explained to her that cake and party were to be considered gifts? Is it too late now to mend the damaged friendship, but would it be helpful to know what I could have done differently? Gentle reader, there's nothing you could have done except choose better friends. The thoughtlessness with which the bride coerced you into subsidizing her wedding was stunning. That she expected a present on top of it and allowed her resentment to ruin the friendship, even more so. On the positive side, especially if this woman plans to have children, Miss Manners observes that losing the friendship will no doubt save you considerable time and money in the future. And that's Miss Manners by Judith Martin. You can send questions to Miss Manners by going to the website, www.missmanners.com. You can send email to missmanners@missmanners.com. Or you can send a letter through U.S. postage to Miss Manners, care of Andrews McMeel Syndication, 1130 Walnut Street, Kansas City, Missouri, 64106. Today's first letter from Miss Manners, first and only letter from Miss Manners, and the bride was stunningly quite entitled. In the horoscopes today, if today's your birthday, May 24th, it's your year of unrealistic thinking. A better tomorrow rides on your wild hopes. Cancer and Capricorn adore you. Your lucky numbers are 2, 18, 11, 5, and 1. For Aries, maybe it's not so helpful to deny what you are interested in, especially.
Speech on. Selected.